The train whistle pierced the autumn air as Delia Morgan clutched her worn carpet bag against her chest, her heart hammering with each mile that brought her closer to Whispering Creek, Colorado. 1878 was supposed to be her year of deliverance, but as the locomotive slowed, belching black smoke into the clear western sky, doubt crept in like an unwelcome shadow. The letters from Franklin Webb had painted a picture of prosperity and kindness, a successful saloon owner seeking a bride, promising comfort and security. Now, standing on the precipice of her new life, Delia wondered if she'd made the gravest mistake of her 22 years. The wooden platform creaked beneath her boots as she stepped off the train, the mountain air thin and crisp in her lungs after the long journey from Boston. Whispering Creek sprawled before her, smaller than she'd imagined, a collection of weathered buildings nestled in a valley surrounded by towering pines and distant snow-capped peaks. Her eyes scanned the sparse crowd, searching for the man who had described himself as distinguished and prosperous. "Miss Morgan," a raspy voice called from behind. Delia turned to see a man approaching, and her stomach knotted instantly. Franklin Webb bore little resemblance to the gentleman he'd claimed to be in his letters. His clothes were rumpled, his vest stained, and even from several paces away, the sour scent of whiskey emanated from him. His bloodshot eyes traveled the length of her figure with an appraisal that made her skin crawl. "Mr. Webb," she managed, forcing a polite nod despite her disappointment. "Prettier than your picture," he slurred, reaching for her bag. "Thought you might be one of them gals who sends a false photograph." Delia relinquished her bag reluctantly. "I assure you, sir, I've been nothing but honest in our correspondence," he grunted, swaying slightly as he turned. "Come along then. Got a room ready for you above the saloon. Sunset's coming and the boys'll be thirsty." She followed him down the dusty main street, noting how passers-by seemed to give Franklin a wide berth, some women averting their eyes entirely. The saloon, grandly named the Golden Nugget, was a far cry from the respectable establishment he'd described. Paint peeled from its facade, and one shutter hung precariously from a single hinge. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour odor of stale beer. A few men hunched over cards at corner tables glanced up as they entered, their gazes lingering on Delia with uncomfortable interest. "Boys, this here's my mail-order bride," Franklin announced proudly, as if displaying a prize mare at auction. "Miss Delia from Boston, educated and all." Delia's cheeks burned as the men's eyes raked over her, their expressions ranging from amusement to something darker. One man tipped his hat, his smile revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "You're a lucky man, Webb," he called. "Too lucky for a sorry drunk like yourself." Franklin's face darkened. "Watch your mouth, Peterson." The staircase to the second floor creaked dangerously as Franklin led her up, fumbling with a key outside a small door at the end of a narrow hallway. The room beyond was spare a bed with a sagging mattress, a washstand with a cracked basin, and a single window overlooking the street below. "It ain't much," Franklin admitted, dropping her bag on the floor, "but it's yours. For now." His eyes narrowed slightly on the last words, sending a chill through her. "Rest up. You'll start helping downstairs tonight." "Tonight?" Delia couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "Mr. Webb, I've been traveling for days." Surely tomorrow would be. His hand shot out, gripping her arm with surprising strength. "Listen here, girl. I paid good money to bring you out west. $50 ain't nothing to sneeze at. You'll earn your keep starting tonight." The smell of whiskey was overwhelming as he leaned closer. "And it's Franklin, not Mr. Webb. We're to be married after all." When he released her arm, Delia stumbled back slightly, her breath coming quick and shallow. "Of course, Franklin, I'll be down shortly." After he left, Delia sank onto the bed, her optimism crumbling like sand between her fingers. The situation was worse than she could have imagined. Franklin was not merely rough around the edges, he was a drunkard, likely violent, and certainly not the gentleman he'd claimed to be. But she had nowhere else to go. Her family farm in Massachusetts long since sold to pay her father's debts after his passing. Hours later, Delia descended the stairs in her plainest dress, having splashed cold water on her face and pinned her honey-brown hair in a simple knot. The saloon had filled considerably, the air now thick with smoke, laughter, and the tinny notes of a piano in the corner. "There she is," Franklin called, his words more slurred than before. He gripped her elbow, steering her behind the bar. You'll serve drinks simple enough even for a woman. The night unfolded in a blur of leering faces and grabbing hands that Delia deflected as politely as possible. Franklin drank steadily, his mood darkening with each glass. By midnight, when he knocked over a bottle of expensive bourbon, his rage bubbled to the surface. Clumsy woman. He shouted, though he'd been the one to cause the accident. That's coming out of your keep, Delia bit her tongue, mopping up the spill silently while avoiding the eyes of the remaining patrons. Most had the decency to look uncomfortable at Franklin's outburst, but none intervened. None except the man who entered just as Franklin raised his hand threateningly. The saloon doors swung open, bringing with them a gust of cool night air and the imposing figure of a stranger. He filled the doorframe tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a dust-covered duster and worn leather chaps. A well-used Stetson cast shadows over his face, but Delia could see the hard set of his jaw and the alertness in his stance as he surveyed the scene before him. "Evening," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Seems I've arrived at an interesting time." Franklin's hand lowered slowly, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "Saloon's closing, stranger. Come back tomorrow." The newcomer removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair was longer than was fashionable, tied back at the nape of his neck. A thin scar ran along his left jawline, the only imperfection in an otherwise striking face. "Actually," he said, approaching the bar with measured steps, "I was hoping for a room for the night, been riding since dawn." Delia found her voice. "We have rooms available, sir." Franklin shot her a venomous look. "My establishment my say on the rooms." He turned back to the stranger. "Like I said, come back tomorrow." The man's gaze shifted between Franklin and Delia, noting the redness on her arm where Franklin had gripped her earlier. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "I don't believe we've been introduced," he said, extending a hand toward Franklin. "Nathan Blackwood." Franklin ignored the outstretched hand. "Don't care who you are, we're closed." Nathan's hand didn't waver. "I insist." There was something in his tone, a quiet authority that made even Franklin hesitate. Reluctantly, the saloon owner grasped Nathan's hand. What happened next occurred so quickly Delia barely registered the movement. Nathan's grip tightened, and with a swift twist, he had Franklin's arm bent at an awkward angle, the saloon owner's face pressed against the bar's sticky surface. "Now," Nathan said conversationally, as if he weren't restraining a man twice his age, "I believe the lady said rooms were available. I'd like to rent one for the night." Franklin sputtered curses, his face purpling with rage and humiliation. "Unhand me, you bastard." "Happy to," Nathan replied, "once you agree to behave civilly toward the lady." The remaining patrons watched with interest, a few exchanging amused glances. Clearly, Franklin Webb commanded little respect in town. "Fine," Franklin spat, and Nathan released him immediately, stepping back with fluid grace. Franklin straightened, adjusting his rumpled vest with as much dignity as he could muster. $2 for the night, up front." Nathan placed the coins on the counter, his eyes never leaving Franklin. "Much obliged." Then, turning to Delia, his expression softened slightly. "If you wouldn't mind showing me to my room, Miss Morgan," she supplied. "Delia Morgan." "Miss Morgan," he repeated, a hint of a smile touching his lips. As Delia led him upstairs, she could feel Franklin's burning gaze on her back. She knew there would be consequences later, but for the moment, she was simply grateful for the interruption. The available room was across the hall from her own, equally sparse but clean enough. Nathan thanked her as she handed him the key, his fingers brushing hers briefly. "Are you all right, Miss Morgan?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching her face. The simple question, spoken with genuine concern, nearly undid her. For weeks, she'd been surviving on determination alone, and the kindness of a stranger threatened to crack her carefully constructed facade. "I'm fine, Mr. Blackwood," she managed, though her voice betrayed her. His expression suggested he didn't believe her, but he merely nodded. "If you need anything, I'm a light sleeper." The implication was clear. He'd heard the altercation downstairs and was offering protection. Delia hadn't experienced such gallantry in a long time, and it left her momentarily speechless. "Thank you," she finally said, "but I'm sure that won't be necessary." How wrong she was. The next morning, Delia rose early, her sleep fitful and plagued by anxiety. She'd managed to avoid Franklin after the saloon closed, slipping into her room and barricading the door with the room's single chair. But daylight brought new challenges, and she couldn't hide forever. Downstairs, she found the saloon empty save for an elderly man sweeping the floor. Hank, she recalled, the establishment's aging handyman. "Morning, miss," he greeted her kindly. "Franklin's still sleeping it off. Probably best to start the coffee and have breakfast ready before he wakes. He's meaner than a rattler with a hangover." Delia nodded gratefully for the advice and set about preparing the morning meal in the small kitchen behind the bar. The pantry was poorly stocked, but she managed to find cornmeal for mush, a few eggs, and some salt pork. As she worked, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Nathan Blackwood entered the main room, looking refreshed despite the early hour. He'd exchanged his dusty trail clothes for a clean shirt and dark trousers, his hair damp from washing. "Good morning," he said, nodding to both Delia and Hank. "Something smells promising." Delia found herself blushing under his direct gaze. "Just breakfast, Mr. Blackwood, nothing fancy." "After weeks of my own cooking on the trail, anything prepared by someone else is fancy," he replied with a warm smile that reached his eyes. As she served him breakfast at one of the tables, Delia was acutely aware of his presence, the quiet confidence he exuded, the way his eyes occasionally sought hers. There was something reassuring about him, a steadiness that contrasted sharply with Franklin's volatile nature. "You're new to Whispering Creek," Nathan observed, breaking the silence. Delia nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "I arrived yesterday." He seemed to choose his next words carefully. "And your relationship with Mr. Webb?" Heat crept up her neck. "I'm his, that is, we're to be married." The words felt like stones in her mouth. Nathan's expression remained neutral, but she noticed the slight tightening of his jaw. "I see. Congratulations are in order, then." Before she could respond, heavy footsteps thundered down the stairs and Franklin appeared, his face haggard and eyes bloodshot. He scowled when he saw Nathan. "You're still here," he growled. Nathan continued eating calmly. "Paid for the night, as I recall." Franklin's attention shifted to Delia. "And you playing hostess while I sleep? Getting friendly with the customers already?" The accusation hung in the air, ugly and unwarranted. Delia straightened her spine. "I was serving breakfast, as any proprietor's wife would be expected to do." "You ain't my wife yet," Franklin sneered, advancing toward her. "And at this rate you might never be." Nathan set down his fork deliberately. "Mr. Webb, perhaps you'd care to join me for breakfast. Miss Morgan has prepared an excellent meal." The distraction worked momentarily, Franklin's anger redirecting toward Nathan. "Don't tell me what to do in my own establishment, Cowboy." "Not telling," Nathan replied easily, suggesting as one businessman to another. This appealed to Franklin's vanity, and after a moment's hesitation, he pulled out a chair at Nathan's table. Delia quickly served him, grateful for the intervention but aware that it was only temporary. Eventually, Nathan would leave and she would be alone with Franklin again. As she returned to the kitchen, she caught snippets of their conversation, Nathan inquiring about the town, its economy, the neighboring ranches. He was gathering information, she realized, though for what purpose she couldn't guess. The morning progressed, and more patrons filtered in for breakfast or early drinks. Franklin, his mood improved by food and the first whiskey of the day, held court at a corner table, regaling the locals with exaggerated tales of his younger days. Nathan approached Delia as she cleared dishes, speaking low enough that only she could hear. "I need to tend to my horse and some business in town, but I'll return later. Will you be all right?" The concern in his eyes touched her deeply. "You're very kind, Mr. Blackwood, but this is my situation to manage." "Nathan," he corrected gently. "And sometimes, Miss Morgan, accepting help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." With that, he departed, leaving Delia to ponder his words as she worked through the morning chores. Franklin, occupied with his friends and the bottle, largely ignored her, which was both a relief and a reminder of her precarious position. By mid-afternoon, the saloon had quieted, most patrons returning to their work until evening. Franklin, several drinks into the day, dozed in his chair. Delia seized the opportunity to slip outside for a moment of fresh air. The main street of Whispering Creek bustled with modest activity, a wagon loaded with timber passing through. women shopping at the general store, a group of children playing with hoops near the schoolhouse. It was a scene of normal frontier life, so at odds with the turmoil inside her. "You look lost in thought." Delia startled at the voice, turning to find Nathan approaching, leading a magnificent chestnut gelding. The horse's coat gleamed in the sunlight, speaking to the care its owner provided. "This is Thunder," Nathan said, noticing her admiration of the horse. "He's been my only consistent companion for years." Delia tentatively reached out to stroke the animal's velvety nose. "He's beautiful." "Temperamental, stubborn, and too smart for his own good," Nathan replied with obvious affection, "but loyal to a fault." "The best companions often are," Delia said softly. Nathan studied her for a moment. "Miss Morgan, forgive my directness, but I sense you're in a difficult position." "If there's anything I can do, there isn't," she interrupted, though not unkindly. "I made my choice when I answered Mr. Webb's advertisement. I'll honor my commitment, even when the other party has clearly misrepresented himself," Nathan challenged. "The man I saw last night is not the man who wrote those letters, I'd wager." Delia's silence confirmed his suspicion. "At least allow me to remain in town a few days," Nathan continued. "I have business to attend to anyway, and the accommodations, while modest, suit me fine." She knew she should refuse, should insist she could handle her situation alone. But the truth was, Franklin's behavior frightened her, and Nathan's presence provided a buffer she desperately needed. "I would be grateful," she admitted finally, "though I fear it only delays the inevitable." Nathan's expression darkened, or provides time for alternatives to emerge. Before she could question his meaning, the saloon doors banged open and Franklin stumbled out, his face contorted with anger when he spotted them together. "What's this?" he demanded, lurching forward. "My bride to be and the cowboy having a private chat." Nathan's posture shifted subtly, placing himself slightly between Delia and Franklin. "Just discussing accommodations, Mr. Webb. I'd like to extend my stay if the room remains available." Franklin's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "Rooms are for travelers passing through, not those looking to settle in. One more night, then you're gone." "That seems inhospitable for a business owner," Nathan observed calmly. "Most establishments welcome paying customers." "Most establishments don't have to worry about customers sniffing around what doesn't belong to them," Franklin retorted, grabbing Delia's wrist. "Come inside, got work to do before the evening rush." Delia winced at his grip but didn't resist, fearful of escalating the situation in public. As Franklin pulled her toward the saloon, she glanced back at Nathan, whose expression had hardened to granite. He gave her a slight nod of promise that this wasn't the end of their conversation. Inside, Franklin released her roughly, causing her to stumble against the bar. "What game are you playing, girl, flirting with that cowboy right under my nose? We were simply talking," Delia protested. "He asked about extending his stay." Franklin snorted. "Talking, sure, I've seen how he looks at you and how you look at him." "Mr. Webb, Franklin." He roared, slamming his fist on the bar. "I told you to call me Franklin, or are you too high and mighty with your Boston manners and education?" Delia took a steadying breath. "Franklin, I assure you, there's nothing improper between Mr. Blackwood and myself. I've been nothing but honest with you." "Unlike you," she wanted to add, but wisely held her tongue. Franklin seemed to deflate slightly, the rage giving way to a petulant scowl. "We'll be married tomorrow. I've already spoken to the preacher. Then there'll be no question who you belong to." Delia's blood ran cold. "Tomorrow." "But we hardly know each other. Surely a proper courtship, Franklin laughed bitterly. "You're a mail-order bride, not some fancy society girl. I paid for you and I've waited long enough." The crudeness of his statement left Delia speechless with shock and humiliation. She'd known her position was one of transaction rather than romance, but to hear it stated so baldly stripped away any illusion of dignity. "Now get the place ready for tonight," Franklin continued, oblivious to or uncaring of her distress. "And wear something prettier. The blue dress from your trunk. Men drink more when served by a pretty face." With that, he stomped up the stairs, leaving Delia alone with her racing thoughts. Tomorrow. She had until tomorrow to decide her fate, submit to a marriage she now knew would be miserable, or flee with no money, no connections, and nowhere to go. As she mechanically began preparing the saloon for the evening, wiping down tables and arranging glasses, Delia's mind worked furiously. She'd come west with such hope, such determination to build a new life after the hardships she'd endured in Boston. The daughter of a once prosperous merchant, she'd watched her family's fortunes collapse after her father's unexpected death revealed mounting debts. With her mother long deceased and no siblings, Delia had been forced to sell their modest home and take work as a seamstress, backbreaking labor that barely provided enough to eat. The advertisement for a bride, successful business owner seeks educated, genteel lady to share prosperous frontier life, had seemed like divine providence. Franklin's letters, eloquent and charming, likely written by someone else, she now realized, had painted a picture of a mature gentleman seeking partnership and companionship. The reality was a cruel joke, yet what alternative did she have? The little money she'd brought had been spent on the journey west. She knew no one in this town, had no skills beyond basic cooking and sewing that would earn her a respectable living. And even if she could find work, unmarried women on the frontier faced constant scrutiny and suspicion. Her troubled thoughts were interrupted by Nathan's return. He entered quietly, Thunder's saddle slung over one strong shoulder, saddlebags in his other hand. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her, his eyes taking in her distressed expression, "is everything all right?" Delia glanced toward the stairs, ensuring Franklin wasn't within earshot. "He wants to marry me tomorrow," she whispered. Nathan's expression darkened. "That's sudden." "It's because of you," she admitted. "He's jealous of our conversations." Nathan set his saddle down by the door and approached the bar, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "Do you want to marry him, Delia?" It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something about the intimacy of it, combined with the direct question, broke through her careful reserve. "No," she whispered, tears threatening. "But I have nowhere else to go, no money, no connections, I'm trapped." Nathan's hand covered hers on the bar, warm and reassuring. "You're not trapped, there are always choices." "What choices?" Delia asked bitterly. "Become a laundress, work in a brothel." "Starve by the roadside, or come with me," Nathan said quietly. Delia's head snapped up, certain she'd misheard. "What? I have a ranch," Nathan explained, his voice low and urgent. 3 days' ride from here. It's modest but growing. I need help running it, someone with sense and education who can manage accounts, correspondence, household matters. The position would come with room, board, and a fair wage. Delia stared at him, stunned by the offer. "You're offering me employment. You don't even know me." "I know enough," Nathan replied firmly. "I know you're intelligent, resourceful, and brave enough to travel across the country alone. I know you deserve better than a life with a violent drunk. The rest we can learn with time." The proposal hung between them, tempting and terrifying. "Mr. Webb would never allow it. He'd come after us." Nathan's expression hardened. "Let him try." The quiet confidence in his voice sent a shiver down Delia's spine, not of fear, but of something else entirely. Here was a man offering not marriage, not romantic platitudes, but a practical solution and the dignity of honest work. "I need to think," she said finally. Nathan nodded, releasing her hand. "Of course, but we'd need to leave tonight if you decide to come, after the saloon closes before dawn." He hesitated, then added, "Whatever you decide, Delia, know that you have worth beyond being someone's wife. You deserve to choose your own path." With that, he gathered his belongings and headed upstairs, leaving Delia with a turbulent mix of emotions and a decision that would alter the course of her life. The evening passed in a blur of activity as the saloon filled with the usual crowd. Franklin, having slept off some of his earlier drunkenness, was almost jovial as he announced their impending marriage to the patrons. Men clapped him on the back, offering congratulations and ribald jokes that made Delia's skin crawl. She served drinks mechanically, her mind elsewhere, weighing Nathan's offer against the security, however unpleasant, of marriage to Franklin. Nathan remained upstairs, and Delia was simultaneously grateful for his absence and desperate for his steadying presence. By midnight, she'd made her decision. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't safe, but it was her choice, and that alone made it valuable. As the last customers staggered out into the night, Franklin locked the front door, swaying slightly on his feet. He'd been drinking steadily all evening, celebrating his imminent wedding. Tomorrow, he slurred, approaching Delia with alcohol-laden breath, you'll be Mrs. Webb, no more serving drinks, you'll manage the books, keep the place clean, might even hire a girl to help with the bar. Delia forced a smile. That sounds sensible, you should rest now, Franklin. Tomorrow is an important day, he leered at her, reaching for her waist. Could start the wedding night early, she sidestepped neatly, gesturing to the mess of glasses and spilled liquor. I need to clean up first, and you should be fresh for the ceremony. Franklin seemed to consider this, his intoxicated mind working slowly. Finally, he nodded. Smart girl, always thinking ahead, that's why I picked you. He patted her cheek clumsily. Don't stay up too late, want you looking pretty tomorrow. Delia waited until his uneven footsteps faded up the stairs, and she heard his door close before letting out a shaky breath. Then, with swift efficiency, she began to clean, not wanting to leave the saloon in disarray, a strange courtesy to a man who had shown her none. After an hour, when she was certain Franklin was deeply asleep, Delia crept upstairs to her room. She changed into her traveling dress, packed her few belongings into her carpet bag, and tucked the little money she had, just a few dollars, into her boot. Then, taking a deep breath, she knocked softly on Nathan's door. He opened it immediately, fully dressed and alert, as if he'd been waiting. One look at her bag told him everything. You're coming, he stated simply. Delia nodded. Yes, but I have conditions. A ghost of a smile touched Nathan's lips. I'd expect nothing less. I work for fair wages, as you offered. I have my own room, and if at any point I wish to leave, you'll help me find passage to the nearest town with no questions asked. Nathan considered her terms seriously. Agreed. With one addition, you'll be treated with respect at all times, by me and anyone else at the ranch. Relief flooded through Delia. Then we have an arrangement. Nathan gathered his things quickly and silently. They crept downstairs, Delia leading the way past the creaky third step. The saloon was dark and quiet, smelling of stale beer and tobacco. At the back door, Nathan hesitated. I'll get Thunder from the livery, he whispered. Wait here. If Webb wakes, run to the sheriff's office. Delia nodded, her heart pounding as Nathan slipped out into the night. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited in the shadows, starting at every creak of the old building. Finally, she heard a soft whistle from outside Nathan's signal. As she stepped into the alley behind the saloon, Delia felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Nathan waited with Thunder and a second horse, a gentle-looking mare. Borrowed from the livery, he explained, helping her mount. We'll return her in the next town and buy you a proper horse. They rode in silence through the sleeping town, keeping to back streets until they reached the main road heading west. Only then did Delia allow herself to exhale fully, looking back at the shrinking silhouette of Whispering Creek, having second thoughts. Nathan asked, noticing her backward glance. Delia shook her head. No, just saying goodbye to a mistake. Nathan's smile was warm in the moonlight. Then let's look forward, not back. We have a long ride ahead. The next 3 days were a test of Delia's endurance and determination. They rode from dawn until dusk, stopping only to rest the horses and take brief meals. Nathan proved to be a considerate traveling companion, respectful of her privacy, patient with her occasional clumsiness around the campfire, and unfailingly polite. At night, he insisted she take the only bedroll while he slept with his saddle as a pillow, his rifle always within reach. They spoke little during these rides, both aware that Franklin might have discovered her absence and sent men after them. Only when they crossed into the next territory did Nathan relax slightly. We should be safe now, he said as they made camp on the third night. We're on friendly land. Delia, sore from riding but exhilarated by her newfound freedom, looked around at the pine-covered hills and distant mountains. It's beautiful country. My ranch is just beyond that ridge, Nathan explained, pointing west. We'll reach it by midday tomorrow. It's not much compared to the grand estates back east, but it's mine, free and clear. How did you come by it? Delia asked, realizing how little she knew about this man she'd trusted with her future. Nathan poked at the campfire, his expression thoughtful. I was a Union cavalry officer during the war. Afterward, I drifted west, worked as a ranch hand, saved every penny. 5 years ago, I had enough to buy a small parcel with a cabin, been expanding ever since. Delia absorbed this information, adding it to the sparse details she'd gathered. Nathan was perhaps 30, educated but not formally so, capable and self-reliant. He carried himself with the discipline of a soldier but lacked the harshness she'd observed in other veterans. "And now," she prompted, "what does your ranch produce?" "Horses, mainly," Nathan replied, a note of pride entering his voice. "I breed and train them for the army, for ranchers, for anyone who needs a good mount. Started with just Thunder and 2 mares. Now I have 20 head." "That explains why you're so good with them," Delia observed, watching how the borrowed mare followed his movements with affectionate interest. Nathan shrugged modestly. "Horses are honest creatures, they respond to kindness and consistency." He hesitated, then added, "Unlike some men." The unspoken comparison to Franklin hung in the air between them. "Thank you," Delia said suddenly, "for rescuing me. I've been so focused on the journey I haven't properly expressed my gratitude." Nathan's eyes, illuminated by the firelight, met hers. "You rescued yourself, Delia. I just provided transportation." Something in his steady gaze warmed her more than the fire. For the first time since arriving out west, Delia felt a flicker of hope for her future, not the desperate optimism that had sustained her journey, but genuine hope, grounded in reality. The next morning they set out early, Delia eager to reach their destination. As Nathan had predicted, by midday they crested a hill that revealed a valley below. Nestled against a backdrop of pines was a modest ranch, a main house of hewn logs, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. "Someone's home," Delia observed, surprised. Nathan nodded. "My foreman, Marcus, and his wife, Sarah, they live in a cabin on the property and help manage things when I'm away." As they approached, Delia saw a tall black man emerge from the barn, shading his eyes against the sun. When he recognized Nathan, he raised a hand in greeting and called toward the house. A moment later, a woman appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. "Welcome back, boss," Marcus called as they rode into the yard. His curious gaze shifted to Delia. "See, you brought company." Nathan dismounted smoothly, then moved to help Delia down. "Marcus, Sarah, this is Miss Delia Morgan. She'll be staying with us, helping with the accounts and household management." If the couple was surprised by this announcement, they hid it well. Sarah, a handsome woman with kind eyes, stepped forward immediately. "Welcome to Blackwood Ranch, Miss Morgan. You must be exhausted from the journey. Come inside, I've stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven." The warm welcome eased Delia's anxiety about her reception. As she followed Sarah into the house, she was pleasantly surprised by its interior. Though modest in size, it was clean and well-appointed, with sturdy furniture, colorful braided rugs, and bookshelves filled with volumes. "It's lovely," Delia said sincerely. Sarah beamed. "Nathan's got good taste. He built most of the furniture himself during the winter months." Over a hearty meal, Nathan explained Delia's situation in broad strokes, omitting the more unsavory details about Franklin but making it clear she had fled an undesirable arrangement. Marcus and Sarah exchanged knowing glances but asked no probing questions. "You'll stay in the spare bedroom," Sarah told Delia. "It's small but comfortable. I've been keeping it ready, hoping Nathan would find someone to help with the books. His figures are atrocious." Nathan accepted the teasing with good humor. "I'm a horseman, not an accountant." The easy rapport between the three of them spoke of long friendship and mutual respect. Delia, accustomed to the rigid social hierarchies of Boston and then the crude dynamics of the saloon, found it refreshingly natural. After the meal, Sarah showed Delia to her room, a snug chamber with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small writing desk beneath a window overlooking the valley. "It's perfect," Delia said, setting down her bag. Sarah studied her with motherly concern. "You've had a hard time of it, haven't you, child?" The simple kindness nearly undid Delia's composure. "It's been challenging," she admitted, "but I'm stronger than I look." Sarah patted her hand. "That's obvious, or you wouldn't have made it this far. Rest now. There'll be plenty of time for work tomorrow." Left alone, Delia sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn her life had taken. A week ago, she'd been on a train heading toward what she thought would be security, if not happiness. Now she was in a stranger's home, employed rather than betrothed, her future uncertain but undeniably brighter. As exhaustion claimed her, Delia's last thoughts were of Nathan, his quiet strength, his unfailing respect, and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The following weeks established a rhythm to life at Blackwood Ranch. Delia rose early, sharing breakfast with Nathan, Marcus, and Sarah before beginning her work. The ranch's accounts were indeed in disarray, and she spent hours organizing ledgers, creating systems for tracking expenses and income, and drafting correspondence to Nathan's clients. Nathan, for his part, worked from dawn until dusk with his horses, training, breeding, and caring for them with evident passion. Delia often watched from her window as he worked in the corral, his movements fluid and confident as he gentled a spirited colt or demonstrated gaits to a potential buyer. In the evenings, they gathered in the main house, sharing meals and conversation. Nathan, she discovered, was well-read despite his lack of formal education, and they often discussed books from his extensive library. Sometimes he played the harmonica, while Marcus accompanied him on a battered guitar, filling the house with melodies that ranged from lively reels to plaintive ballads. As autumn deepened toward winter, Delia found herself settling into ranch life with unexpected ease. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, grew calloused and capable. She learned to ride properly under Nathan's patient instruction, to identify the herbs in Sarah's garden, to recognize the distinct personalities of each horse in the herd. And with each passing day, her feelings for Nathan Blackwood grew more complex. He was unfailingly kind, scrupulously respectful of the boundaries they'd established. Never once did he treat her as anything less than a valued colleague. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart quicken, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something he quickly masked when their eyes met. For his part, Nathan found himself increasingly enchanted by Delia's presence in his home. Her competence impressed him, the neat rows of figures in the ledgers, the letters she composed that had already secured 2 new contracts, the way she'd organized his chaotic office into a functional workspace. But it was her spirit that truly captivated him. Despite the hardships she'd endured, Delia approached each day with quiet determination and occasional flashes of humor that illuminated her face like sunshine breaking through clouds. She never complained, never shirked even the most mundane tasks, and showed genuine interest in learning everything about the ranch's operations. Nathan found himself inventing reasons to be near her, bringing her tea when she worked late, suggesting evening rides to show her the property, seeking her opinion on ranch decisions that previously he'd made alone. And each night, as he retired to his room across the hall from hers, he reminded himself of the promise he'd made. She was his employee under his protection, not an object of romantic pursuit. Their careful dance might have continued indefinitely had Webb not reappeared in their lives. The first snow of winter had just dusted the valley when a rider approached the ranch one afternoon. Nathan, working with a new colt in the corral, noticed the approaching figure and signaled to Marcus, who casually moved toward the rifle leaning against the fence. Delia, returning from the chicken coop with a basket of eggs, froze as the rider came into clear view. Even at a distance, she recognized the slouched posture and red vest. "Go inside," Nathan told her quietly, having approached without her noticing. "Lock the door." She hesitated, her eyes fixed on the approaching rider. "Nathan, I can't keep running forever." "You're not running," he replied firmly. "This is your home now, go inside." The simple declaration, "your home," sent a wave of emotion through Delia. But she nodded and hurried to the house, where Sarah was already watching from the window. A shotgun propped against the wall outside, Nathan moved to the center of the yard, waiting as Webb reined in his horse. The saloon keeper looked worse than when Nathan had last seen him, thinner, his clothes more disheveled, his face haggard from weeks of hard travel and harder drinking. "Blackwood," Franklin spat, swaying slightly in the saddle, "knew it was you who took her." Nathan maintained an outward calm, though his body was tensed for trouble. Miss Morgan made her own decision to leave a situation any reasonable person would find intolerable. Franklin's laugh was harsh. "She was mine, paid good money for her passage west, had an agreement." "She's not property," Nathan replied, his voice dangerously soft. "And any agreement made under false pretenses isn't binding." Marcus had positioned himself to the side, rifle held casually but ready. Franklin glanced between the two men, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "I want to see her," he demanded. "Tell her to come out." "Miss Morgan doesn't wish to see you," Nathan said. "I suggest you turn around and head back to Whispering Creek. The matter is closed." Franklin's hand moved toward his hip, where a revolver was poorly concealed beneath his coat. "Not leaving without what's mine." What happened next occurred with such speed that later, when Delia tried to piece it together from her vantage point at the window, she could only recall fragments. Nathan's hand moving in a blur, the gleam of metal as Franklin's gun cleared its holster, a single shot that echoed across the valley. Franklin crumpled sideways in his saddle, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. His gun lay in the dust where it had fallen. "You shot me," he gasped, more surprised than pained. "Be grateful I aimed for your shoulder," Nathan replied evenly, his own revolver still trained on the wounded man. "The next one goes somewhere more permanent if you don't leave now and never return." Marcus stepped forward, picking up Franklin's fallen weapon. "Boss, he needs that shoulder tended before he rides out." Nathan nodded, his expression grim. "Take him to the bunkhouse, patch him up enough for travel, then he's gone today." As Marcus led the injured man away, Nathan finally holstered his weapon. He looked toward the house, where Delia stood in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," he said as he approached. Delia shook her head. "I'm sorry you were forced to violence on my account." Nathan's expression softened. "Protecting this ranch and those who belong here is my responsibility, one I take seriously." There it was again, that subtle inclusion, the suggestion that she belonged not as property, not as obligation, but as an essential part of something larger than herself. Later that evening, after Franklin had been treated and sent on his way with stern warnings never to return, Nathan found Delia on the porch, wrapped in a blanket against the chill, gazing at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. "He's gone," Nathan said, settling beside her on the bench. "And I don't think he'll be back." Delia nodded, drawing the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I should feel relieved. Instead, I just feel tired, as if I've been holding my breath for weeks and only now can exhale." Nathan was silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "When I found you in that saloon, you were trapped in a situation not of your making. You showed remarkable courage in leaving, in starting over with nothing but faith in yourself and, I hope, some small trust in me." "Not so small," Delia murmured. Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and something shifted between them, a barrier dissolving, a possibility emerging. "Delia," Nathan began, his voice lower, "I promised you employment, respect, and the freedom to choose your own path. I stand by that promise. But I would be dishonest if I didn't tell you that my feelings for you have grown beyond what an employer should feel for his housekeeper." Delia's breath caught. Though she had sensed his attraction, hearing it voiced aloud made it suddenly, thrillingly real. "Nathan, please," he interrupted gently, "let me finish. I'm not asking anything of you. I'm simply stating a truth, one you deserve to know as you consider your future. If you wish to maintain our current arrangement, I will respect that completely. If you wish to seek opportunities elsewhere, I will help you, and if you should ever feel—" Delia placed her hand over his, stopping his words. "I've known my own heart for some time," she said softly. "I just wasn't certain of yours." The hope that bloomed in Nathan's eyes warmed her more than any blanket could. "And what does your heart tell you?" "That home isn't a place," Delia replied, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "It's where you're valued, respected, and loved." Nathan's hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. "Is that what you feel here, loved?" "Yes," Delia whispered. Though the words have remained unspoken until now, Nathan's free hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "I do love you, Delia Morgan. Not as a possession or a convenience, but as the remarkable woman you are." When their lips met, it was like coming home after a long journey, familiar yet new, comfortable yet exhilarating. Delia melted into the kiss, years of loneliness and uncertainty dissolving in the warmth of Nathan's embrace. They were married the following spring, when wildflowers carpeted the valley and new foals wobbled on spindly legs in the pastures. The ceremony was small, just Marcus and Sarah, a few neighboring ranchers, and the traveling preacher who visited the valley monthly. Delia wore a simple dress of blue silk that Nathan had ordered from Denver, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a formal veil. Nathan, unrecognizable from the trail-worn cowboy who had first entered Franklin's saloon, stood tall in a new suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving Delia's face as they spoke their vows. The celebration afterward was joyous music, dancing, and a feast that showcased Sarah's considerable culinary skills. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Nathan found Delia standing slightly apart from the revelry, watching with a contented smile as Marcus led the other men in a lively fiddle tune. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Delia leaned into his embrace. "Only that I didn't find you sooner." Nathan pressed a kiss to her temple. "Perhaps everything happened exactly when it needed to. If you hadn't answered Franklin's advertisement, if I hadn't stopped at that particular saloon on that particular night." "Then we owe Franklin Webb a debt of gratitude," Delia said with a wry smile, "though I'm not inclined to deliver our thanks in person." Nathan chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her side. "Last I heard, he sold the saloon and moved further west. Some towns are better off without certain citizens." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate. Finally, Nathan spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I received a letter yesterday from the Army quartermaster. They want to increase their order for horses double what we provided last year." Delia turned to face him, eyes bright with excitement. "Nathan, that's wonderful, but can we meet such a large order?" "With the new breeding stock we acquired last month, yes. But it means more work, more hands to hire, more responsibility." He studied her face. "Are you prepared for that?" Delia thought of the frightened young woman who had stepped off the train in Whispering Creek less than a year ago, how lost she had felt, how desperate for security at any cost. That woman seemed like a stranger now. "I welcome it," she said firmly. "We'll build something remarkable together, Nathan, I know it." His smile, tender and full of promise, was all the confirmation she needed. As he led her back to the dance, Delia reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought her here, not to the safe, predictable life she had once thought she wanted, but to something far better. A life of purpose, partnership, and love freely given and received. Years passed, and Blackwood Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Nathan's reputation for breeding exceptional horses spread throughout the West, while Delia's organizational skills and business acumen transformed the operation from a modest ranch to a thriving enterprise. They added onto the main house as their family grew, first with the birth of their daughter, Clara, in 1880, followed by twin boys, James and Thomas, 2 years later. The children grew up strong and capable, at home on horseback almost before they could walk, equally comfortable with books from the ever-expanding library and chores in the barn. Marcus and Sarah remained integral to the ranch, becoming more like family than employees. Sarah, who had been unable to have children of her own, doted on the Blackwood children, teaching Clara to cook and garden while Marcus taught the boys the finer points of horsemanship alongside their father. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Nathan surprised Delia with a gift, the deed to the neighboring property, effectively doubling the size of their ranch. "You've turned my modest dream into something greater than I ever imagined," he told her as they stood on the ridge overlooking their expanded lands. "Every success we've had has been because of your strength, your intelligence, and your unwavering faith in what we could build together." Delia, her honey-brown hair now streaked with silver at the temples, leaned against his shoulder. "We did it together, Nathan, equal partners, just as you promised that first night on the porch." He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her close against the autumn chill. "Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have unfolded if you had stayed with Franklin, if I had continued wandering?" "Sometimes," Delia admitted. "But then I look at our children, our home, everything we've built, and I know that this was always where we were meant to be." She turned in his embrace, meeting his gaze directly. "You saved me, Nathan Blackwood." He shook his head, touching his forehead to hers. "No, Delia, you saved yourself. I was just fortunate enough to be there when you did, and wise enough to recognize the treasure you are." As they stood together on the ridge, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson, Delia reflected on the journey that had brought her west, not as a mail-order bride seeking security at any price, but as a woman who had found the courage to forge her own path, and in doing so, had found love more profound than she had ever dared to imagine. In the end, she hadn't needed rescuing after all. She had simply needed the freedom to discover her own strength and the opportunity to build a life with a man who valued her as an equal partner. Together, they had created not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love, respect, and mutual support that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of choosing one's own destiny and the transformative magic of love freely given.